I really think that the beginning of the pandemic was just something that was difficult for everyone to fathom. And while we know evictions wasn't anything new, it was really the fact that so many people were in financial constraints now. The job loss and just everything that came tumbling down with the pandemic was heightened. And now lots of people were falling behind on their rent. So what was the likely next outcome was evictions. We really wanted to understand what was happening. And so our partners, BASTA in Travis County, have been doing observations in the courtroom since before the pandemic. And so they pivoted very quickly to be online and start watching virtually because the courts were asked to start streaming the cases to prevent the cluster of people and the possibility of super spreader events happening in the courtroom. And so JPs were asked to start allowing virtual options and allowing telephone hearings and Zoom hearings, and started streaming their cases publicly to continue to allow open court in their courtrooms.
Thinking about how to support my community, and with special emphasis on how, like, COVID from a public health standpoint of like how everything connects and how housing is very important for public health and overall community wellness.
In the last year, we've been able to bring on over 60 volunteers onto this project. We've been able to log over 2,000 observations, and we've been in over 400 court dockets. And so that is really a small chunk, so to say, of the large evictions that have been happening in Harris County, and we just want to grow that further.
My 9-to-5 job was not very community oriented, and so Courtwatch was really my time to do something that I felt like would benefit and does benefit the community. And I like having that kind of sense of purpose, and that my time is being used for a good thing, right? And I mean, if other people feel that way and like to have a sense of purpose and doing good for their community, I think volunteering is a great way to do that.
We really wanted to see what the issues were, how this was going to change things, and what type of people were going to be in eviction court.
I think more often than not, people are facing maybe their first eviction case, right? So it can be really hard to find resources, to understand what's going on. You know, maybe some tenants don't even know whether or not they have to show up. Sometimes tenants show up when the case was already dismissed, and they just didn't know.
We do know that housing costs are the biggest bill that a household takes on, and we estimate that most households spend roughly, or hopefully not more than 30% of their total gross income on their household. And when everyone loses their job in a household because of the pandemic, that gross income is now nowhere near sustainability to keep your family housed. This eviction crisis was something brand new for a demographic that had always had financial stability. The laws for renters in eviction court are fewer and far between in Texas. And there's really not many protections for renters. We did see that change a little bit during the pandemic, that many emergency orders have come down the pipeline, whether the city, the county, or the JPs themselves have issued these emergency orders. We have seen that the Supreme Court of Texas has also issued emergency orders dictating how the justice of the peace are supposed to act.
I think it says a lot that even the default judgment when a tenant doesn't show up is that they can be evicted. That really speaks for itself in saying that it's not really set up for taking care of the tenants.
One of the big pushes with advocates and legal aids was that know your rights training, or any type of education on what your rights are as a tenant and how you can enact legal assistance to be able to help you in the court of law against these eviction cases. The CDC moratorium, while it was active at the time, needed to be triggered by a tenant. The protection of the justice of the peace in Travis County was an automatic protection that did not allow landlords to file against non-payment of rent cases.
I think over time, especially with the CDC moratorium, the different JPs kind of had their own varying levels of understanding how the process changed, and even just following the new protocol. So that was the main change over time, I think, as more became more aware that they had to actually follow the rules.
We started communicating with Justice of the Peace immediately. We sent them a letter to ask them to stream. We sent them a letter to ask about accessibility, ask about language, and just really push the need for protections or for equal discovery between landlords and tenants, especially because we understood that the protections and the laws were changing around the pandemic and around eviction court. And so we really tried to be that connection for the justice of the peace in allowing them to understand the information and come talk to us if they had any questions about anything that they wanted to know.
Some JPs, almost wouldn't even bring up the CDC declaration, or more recently, like rent relief. And then some would go as far to be like, here's the website, like this is an option for you and it could help. And I think that's really important and also kind of sad that depending on where someone lives, what precinct they're in, they're going to have a very different experience because their JP is different.
Just being aware of the crisis and not trying to put any of our staff or volunteers in any type of danger. We have been streaming only. And so the fact that we are virtually there does limit our presence being known. We do know that in Courtwatch, the physical presence of someone's eyes watching the justice of the peace does actually change outcomes because they know they're being watched. One time we had one of our staff members allowed in the Zoom, and the JP actually spoke into the void, saying that he understands that there are people watching and there are people paying attention, and he is trying to do his due diligence. So they are paying attention and they are aware that there are advocates and volunteers observing their work. Our Courtwatch system started in September of 2020, and so we piloted this with a couple of staff and volunteers, and it has really been able to grow in the last year. And We've had a lot of volunteers come into the program, and I think this really helps increase advocacy and just understanding of the public as to what a justice of the peace is. They are an elected official, how we need to maintain them accountable, and how the public can actually be that advocate. And so a lot of our Courtwatch observations actually requires the assistance of the public and the volunteers to be those people in the courtroom logging and watching and maintaining that accountability.
I've seen so many dockets, and very few of those have a tenant with legal representation. So that could make a huge difference, and also kind of put a little bit more power on the tenant side.
I think a big part of court watching and observing and logging is to really speak to how things are currently happening and really try and change that for the future. And while we're trying to change the existence of court and rental assistance for the pandemic, we are trying to make that existing change be a persistent change in the long run.